Welcome to Unmoored, America adrift in historical forgetfulness and finding our way back. In this show, we dig into the societal upheavals in recent U.S. history that have left so many feeling lost, angry, or hopeless, and explore how our nation became so unmoored. At the heart of this upheaval is a major debate over how to build a society where everyone can thrive. Our host is history professor and theologian Carl Kreisman. Joining Carl is Matthew Porter, a writer, director, and creative executive.
Okay, so I think it'd be useful if we did loop back to episode 1 and we talk about, well, I mentioned that there were 3 problems, and I think I could maybe come back now having laid out some of the things we talked about in history, and I could come back and say, let's talk about those 3 positions, or those 3 problems, I should say, sorry, and let's address those and kind of walk through those. I won't ask you to know if you remember them all, because that would be unfair. But the first one that we've noted a little bit here is that we have, my phrase, an addiction to ease, to comfort, to excess. We talked about how in the 90s you began to see an attempt to banish pain, both medically and socially. And you saw it on a variety of places. We talked about all this in episode 1. So I would say that when we say, well, what's your answer here, Carl? It does lean into those people who have a religion, who have a faith viewpoint. So the first point is you step into your moderation. Again, there may be some I'm not thinking of, but in my mind, you tell me if you think of some, there's no like religious groups. Okay, I am thinking of one now that I say that. But I'm going to say what I was going to say. There's no religious groups, or maybe there's only one, that somehow acts like excess is a good thing. Right. Generally speaking, moderation is esteemed. Yeah, and you use the resources you have, the financial resources, to help other people. And so that's step into that, which obviously is going to take some demand of how you're going to have to rearrange your life. I mean, if you're to this point in the podcast episode here at the end of the journey, and you're listening to me, and I've already told you there's no top-down, one-size-fits-all pill that's going to fix things. We're now talking about individuals. And so you need to then think, how do I manage my money? And what do I need to sell my house, get a smaller house? Do I need to cut back on some of my kids' activities so I have a little more flexibility? Do I need to not buy as many clothes as I'm buying, et cetera, et cetera? But that's not hey, don't buy stuff. That's me saying, are you part of a religion? Carl, I'm part of a religion. It asks me to see that everything I possess belongs to my God, and I need to live as his trustee, managing it, so that I can give a bunch of it away, and I do. And so maybe I don't give enough, and there's not even, in my opinion, a specific amount, but it's the mentality of that. So I need to do that. If I go the other direction, then I will only think like everybody else of me, consumer.
And so I'm going to cut down to just one Ferrari. I don't need 3. You're right.
Exactly. Well, so another thing then, particularly from a Christian point of view in this regard, is disenculturate. We've talked about this a few times, but basically find a way to disconnect from the culture. So here's an example. Now this is in both the Jewish and the Christian faith. It's really more in the Jewish faith, but other religions have something similar. So the Jewish have this concept of Sabbath. And the idea of Sabbath involves time and a day. But if you pull back and you say, well, what's really happening there? Well, I'm choosing not to participate in the normal energy or frantic doings of life at that time. So maybe your Sabbath's not a full day. Maybe it's half a day. Your Sabbath can involve your technology. One of my children takes a Sabbath with technology. This is a young person who's choosing to disconnect.
Very cool.
From technology. Find a way to cut yourself off. Other religions might talk about mindfulness or meditation, right? Finding a time to do that so that you can cut yourself off from the normal sense of that franticness will help you disenculturate. Here's another thing. Go outside. Go get your hands in the dirt. If I could be dictator for the day, one of the things that I would make people do is I would make people go plant something. And if you live in an apartment or in the urban setting, make you go get a potted plant that you have to tend. It will live for a time. It'll die. It will remind you about the pain thing. Every death is a normal part of our life. It's not to be overly feared. You kind of accept it, kind of walk with it, but you get to tend it. You get to grow it. Get your hands dirty. It's actually our first jobs as the human species, tending, tilling, gardening. So get outside and get away from the things that are screaming at you.
And you're a good gardener, and you know of what you speak here.
I thank you very much. Yes, I now have, I think, 6 separate garden spots in my yard where I do different things for them. Some have, one's a desert garden, and one's more for fruits, and one's for pollinators. But yes.
So cool.
Get out there. Give away stuff. Buy less things and give away stuff. Again, this is me just saying, what's the solution if there's a problem of addicted to excess? It's like, well, I need to cut myself off. Now, it doesn't mean give away everything, but give away a few things. Remember, now Jesus taught this, but I think it's useful. Whatever your treasure, whatever you think is most, that's where your heart is. So is your treasure the NFL? Is your treasure gambling? Is your treasure Amazon? Is your treasure shopping at Walmart? If so, then own it. But I would suggest that's not healthy for us as a society. Okay, so that's the first one. Anything you want to add to that?
No, just on that last one, I have a friend who is not a teetotaler, but he's not a drunk. He's a priest, actually.
I like it. Very good.
But he has a policy, and it was not his, but he adapts it. He fasts from, and this is just one particular thing, but alcohol. So he fasts from it 1 day a week, none. And then every month, 1 week a month, none.
Yeah.
And then every year, there's a full month where he will go without drinking, just as a way of staying detached and making sure that you're not being owned by any particular thing. And I think that could broadly be applied to a lot of things, but it's that proactive vigilance to make sure you're not being owned by something.
That's good.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I've used this word addict on purpose to assuage some of our fears, and an addict typically can't see it. What's one of the first things with the 12-step process? I have to admit. And it takes a while for people to get there. A lot of people don't get there. And at least when you get there, you're going. So I think that's where we are as a country. We could sort of admit to ourselves, yeah, this is a problem. And I realize there's issues about our economy and other things that are built in to that, which is a different conversation. But just, again, I'm trying to fix what I can fix, and I can fix this part in me. And so down that road. Speaking of me, the second thing we talked about was individualism, hyper-individualism, the lie of the rugged individual that somehow founded the country. It's like, no, that's not true. And obviously, if the Surgeon General is getting involved, as he did last year, saying that we have an epidemic, clearly everybody can see this. We have a problem in which we have failed to embrace what we saw our colonies do. And we talked about colonization, I think episode 8, that they needed, the only way they survived was collectively, not individually, right? And the Surgeon General was obviously late to the party. Robert Putnam in 2000. You and I were both involved in the religious we became a church movement that my wife and I started called Numinous. And I'd like to think if you ask anybody who participated, even for one day, they came one day, and you said, what's that group about? They would say they're about community. They're about one another. They focused on looking at some of these, we call them the one another commands. But the point of it was we have to intentionally turn ourselves away from that natural isolation that kind of builds in. And in particular, an isolation of only people like me. And so a way I do that is that we focus on others. So here's some other things you could do. Go find out the names of your neighbors. I know it seems scary for a lot of people, but literally, if you have to, go knock on their door. Take a plate of cookies, go to your local grocery store, buy some stuff so they don't have to worry about who you are. Did you make them? They're wrapped. Here it is. It's a little piece of pie. It's a cookie, whatever. And just introduce yourself. If you've lived there a long time and you're embarrassed because it's been 10 years, you don't know them, just start with that. Man, I'm so embarrassed. It's been 10 years. I should have done this 10 years ago. But my name's Carl. I just want to say hi. That's it. Don't be weird. Don't got to get into it anymore. It's just, I want to get to know who you are. If you start with that part, just talk about your lawn or talk about what's happening in the block if your apartment complex is on. Talk about the traffic or your favorite sport or something. Just be a normal human having a boring conversation with another normal human and leave it there. Don't ask the third rail questions. Don't go there. Just be simple. Here's another thing. Go join another group of people. Real humans in a physical space. And now, look, I've been online since it started. I'm a gamer. I know all about the benefits of having some of the online community stuff. However, it never can replace the human touch. Remember the movie Castaway?
Yeah.
Tom Hanks?
Yeah.
On the DVD, they had like an expert who like said, oh yeah, he was like a reference point and taught him a bunch of stuff. And they're like, hey, we want to have this movie. This guy's on this island by himself, blah, blah, blah. What are these things he's got to solve? And he's like, well, all the easy ones, right? He's got to find water, got to find fire, got to find shelter. But then the guy said, there's actually one more thing you've got to work on. And this was not in the original script. Said, he will not survive if there's no one else there. He will die.
Wow.
So he'll die without water. He'll die without air, obviously. He'll die without shelter. He'll die without fire. So you got to put that in the script. And they go, yeah, we got all that. He'll die without companionship. And of course, that led to the creation of the character of Wilson.
Wow, how about that?
That was on the original script.
No kidding.
And so they realized we have to fix this. You remember the story?
Yeah, and that it's you're like, oh, he's friends with volleyball. That's ridiculous. But when you watch it, you're like, no, it resonates.
And you remember what happened to Wilson?
Yeah. Oh,
spoiler alert, but go ahead.
Rest in peace.
Yeah,
he floated away.
And Hanks's character did what?
Oh, he was desperate. He was distraught. He risked his own life,
right,
to save an inanimate object.
Right. And then he finally, after failing, gets back on his broken raft and sobs.
So sad.
It's one of the saddest moments in the whole movie.
Yes.
And you realize as the audience member, I just watched the death of a character. So this expert at the time of Castaway talks about this. This resonated with me hugely at this time. I want to say it's late 90s. I should have looked it up. But the fact that we die as a species without individuals. So don't lean in on just, I've got these friends online. No. Go get some real human people. Go do something that's a physical activity. There's all kinds of stuff. Find the meetup groups that play kickball or something. Go to your local library. A lot of libraries have a lot of great clubs. There'll be a book club about something or a physical club about something. You can do a meeting with some kind of a thing. Find a volunteer group on a topic or a thing you personally enjoy, but do it in a group. I told you just last week I was speaking at our local university, UCF, about 600 senior adults in this room. But it wasn't just to hear me speak. That's a club that they're in. It's called Life at UCF. So if you're over, I think theirs is over the age of 50. But, that's a club connected to age. But then they did trips together. They do activities together. They do service projects together. And I'm confident all 600 people don't do all those things. Probably groups of 10 or 15.
Last Friday night, quickly, our high school's 30th reunion.
Ah, nice.
And ended up being like a casual thing, not like a formal whatever, just the game and hang it after. But I'm on the way there, and it was rainy, and I'm tired. I was literally right on the edge of we could not go. Canceling plans is kind of a new favorite thing, just right on the edge. I'm like, no. Let's go. And I saw these people, some of whom I have known since first grade.
Wow.
And my heart was so happy.
Yeah.
I didn't, in a completely unanticipated way. I'm like, it'll be great to see them. But when I saw them, I was not expecting it. I was not expecting this the flood of feelings and everything. And I feel like we have those opportunities all the time.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to stay home and watch Netflix and order food in. I've done it. I'm not throwing rocks, but we miss something that is intrinsic to being human when we say no to that enough times.
Yep, absolutely. And it'll be helpful if the group you get involved with is a large enough group. So it's great if you go join a D&D club and there's just the 6 of you and it's always those 6. But find another group that's larger for the very purpose that more than likely someone in the mix will not think like you think.
Perfect.
Here's why. Because then later, when you are watching the news or you are watching somebody talking or something, or there is some conversation, you'll think to yourself, wait a minute, I think my friend Carl thinks like that. Now, I know Carl from this club. He's a pretty cool guy. We have a good time together, but he's mentioned a few things. I bet he thinks like that. And then instead of going, I hate that guy, you say to yourself, well, this is my friend. He's a casual friend. He's a casual acquaintance. I'm going to, at the next meeting, or I may even reach out if I've got a a text, and say, hey, man, can we get some coffee? And then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to ask him about what may be a third real issue. But it's not me finding out to attack someone. It's me being curious.
Help me understand.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
But I trust you because we've been in this thing together. I've seen you. We're on the same committee together. We've gone on this trip together. We did these activities together. So I know now that you're someone I enjoy and feel safe in your presence. But I can now ask you what probably is a hard question, but I'm going to be curious as to, well, why do you think, what am I not seeing that you see? It doesn't mean I want to change your mind, but see the beauty of that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
and
my
to
gosh.
put them on the defensive.
Exactly.
There's no battle to win.
Exactly.
It's
All
beautiful.
Right. Third thing I brought up, this might have been the deepest one, and there's a whole long conversation here, is postmodernism, which, I said on episode 1, the only truth is whatever I deem is right for me.
Right.
This really might be the fundamental problem of the whole society, but it's too big for us to unpack now. But let me say it as simply as possible. To think like that is what an unthinking person does.
Yeah.
It's illogical. If you really believe it, try to go live that out.
Yeah. Falls apart pretty quick.
It falls apart very quick when you catch yourself like being angry at a person who cuts you off. You can't be angry at them. They're just doing what's right for them.
I'm living my truth, man.
Or they cut in front of you at the grocery store. There's not a problem.
Yeah, my truth is you cut in front of me, you get knifed.
Nobody can live like that. So stop saying it and catch yourself. Kind of, there's a spiritual concept that I love that talks about kind of third personing, where you kind of watch, or you put a guard over your mind, or you capture your thoughts. And the point is being aware of my own thinking. So if I ever catch myself saying some version of, well, maybe that's true for you, or, well, that's not true for me, stop yourself. Say, wait, hang on a second. I should not say that, because that's illogical and it's not correct. And then if you go down that road, then think in terms of that what we've done here is we've investigated history. And I'm showing you this evidence, not of my opinion. I've linked to many of the different documents that we've looked at to try to show you kind of this is something you can read for yourself. It's not asking you to just take my word for it, but you lean in on the evidence that's there. You can go read them, and you can say that there is a truth in what they say. Now, there's more that we could get into that this one perhaps takes the most amount of time, but I'm not going to. But just recognize we cannot live the only way to live this way is with the dictator. You can say it that way more starkly. Mm-hmm. If you end up here, and then the dictator is every individual is a dictator. Mm. And so then the society descends into chaos, violence, and to some degree madness. Nobody's ever wrong for anything, including murder, rape, theft. You can't say they're wrong. And hopefully you're listening to me right now, you're like, of course you can say it's wrong. The moment you say, of course you can say it's wrong, is the moment you're admitting that there is something true beyond what we individually think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. There's so much more to explore with that, but yes.
Yeah. Well, again, that's a deep one, and maybe I do need to have another bonus episode on that one or investigate it. But that's kind of the thing. So again, there's those the three problems, and I've tried to address them. Maybe let's bring it in for a landing here. Yeah. It's not a quick landing, so we're just beginning our descent, ladies and gentlemen. Let's loop back to our two characters.
Right.
All right, so I've laid out this idea in episode 3, really kind of dug into the two characters in the story, and let's kind of see if I can offer a few things observationally to them that might be of use. So to the conservative Christian. The first thing I would say is learn the history that Christianity, while prominent, was not singular as an element of the story. Second, remember when we talked about Christendom? Mm. Again, I mentioned already today, the DOM, D-O-M, it stands for dominion, right? So like kingdom, king dominion. And what we saw in episode 5 is that Christendom, that was bad. Yeah. It had bad ramifications. And quite honestly, it's a departure from what Jesus himself says he's looking for.
Right. Corrupts it.
There is a kingdom Jesus talks about, and there's been a 2,000-year debate since he was here and left and then came back and all the things that happened with him about what he meant. We're not getting into that debate, but to simplify, at no point did he mean or imply or say that we humans were supposed to go out and particularly with force create the kingdom for him. We live as participants in the kingdom. We are his kind of partners or his representatives about the kingdom. But Jesus never forces anyone to do anything. We looked, remember that when we read the letter to Diogenes, he said that Jesus, quote, willed to save humans by persuasion, not by compulsion, for compulsion is not God's way of working. In Christendom, it became compulsion, and the persecuted went to become the persecutors. We don't want there to be a Christian nation, because that's going to end up being a situation where you're going to go right down that same road. What about if you're in the minority culture? Well, I think you are the minority culture. I've tried to show you, particularly when we looked at the Roman period in our journey, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. We saw this in episode 6 and 7. There's more growth and more positive came out of that moment where the minority viewpoint came out of in that time. Or many, many good things came out at that time, if that's the way I can say it. We also saw in episode 4 that if we are, and I'm saying we because I am a Christian, if we do feel like we've become a minority culture, remember what we saw in episode 4. That's not because something was done to us, but because of how we failed to live out the very things God said he expected and wanted to see. Remember, you and I reread some of these different statements from the people who represented God to those people. And they're really clear statements. There's not ambiguity in them. And when you don't do those things, then that's when, in that telling, God moves. Now, I'm not trying to say in the 21st century, God is doing this necessarily Christians, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't. If he was doing it, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense, because it's a very familiar pattern to what you can see when you look back to that time period in those people. We examined one source written by a man named Jeremiah. And remember, we talked about the fact that there was this human trifecta of human boasting. They boast in wisdom, boast in strength, boast in wealth. Well, in the same passage, if you want to look it up, it's in Jeremiah 9. He quotes God saying, I am the Lord who demonstrates unfailing love and who brings justice and righteousness to the earth, and I delight in these things. So, in other words, we get an alternative triad of unfailing love, justice, righteousness. What can I do if I'm going to be someone who says, well, I feel like I'm a Christian, I'm in a minority position? Live out unfailing love, justice, and righteousness. You can see that in the passage you mentioned in Jeremiah in chapter 29, right, where the people are told to pray for and bring the shalom to the place that's the majority culture. Well, how do I bring the shalom? Well, there's some other things that could mean, but certainly would mean bring unfailing love, bring justice, bring righteousness in how I live. In the New Testament, the writers, we've looked at these guys before. Well, one of these for sure we looked at, Paul. We might not have mentioned this other guy. His name was Peter. Mm-hmm. They both wrote letters to the early Christian communities in that first 3 centuries when they were the minority culture. And they pick up this exact same theme. Paul writes in one of his letters that you should do all the things you do as unto the Lord, which gets back to that idea of doing things for quality. But the reason he says you do that is for the flourishing of other people, including people who are not believers. And then Peter reminds his readers that the Christian should live as the stranger or the traveler, like the immigrant. You're not a citizen of this place. Mm-hmm. You're passing through. You're part of this larger kingdom. And then how do you live? Well, you need to abstain, he said, from the normal human vices. And that, of course, ultimately comes from a whole Christian conversation about how do I live well and a whole bunch of stuff we're not covering in this story. But if you're a religious person, even if you're not a Christian, you know that you need to lean into a higher power, training from, your religious leaders, and that kind of an idea to help yourself move against the normal stance of the human And so the normal stance is this trifecta of human boasting, but from a Christian in particular, so we're talking to the conservative person who's unhappy finding themselves in the minority position. Well, you need to be someone who will go for this upside down world, which is again that kind of living as God asks us to, of recognizing that he values the upside down things. Sort of like Jesus started off the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, right? That there's something special or favored for them. So then, still talking to the conservative Christian, make sure then how you individually are living matches the things that your holy documents say are necessary. You can't fix the country demanding governing rules and elections while being unwilling to live out personally, privately, the very ethos that your own faith position prescribes and describes. And this, again, ties back into that idea of disenculturation. And then I've said this once, but I'm going to say it again because it's the last time you're going to hear me on this podcast. If you're someone who's that frustrated, overly external, shaking of your fist Christian, stop talking. If I could again be sort of dictator, at least for the Christians, I would say, for the next 10 years, just be quiet. Don't say anything. Just let's reorient ourselves back to what we really value in the faith and ensure that I am living it out, even if the culture, quote unquote, is going to hell in a handbasket around me. Make sure that I'm living in a certain way. Again, yes, sure, be ready, as the Bible says to the Christians, be ready in and out of season, to give a reason for your hope and joy. Yeah, do that. That's the neighbor who you've just met. But put your focus on living in the way, that upside down world, and do it quietly. Peter said, look, your neighbors will know. They'll see it. And they will. They will. And to say that, one last thing for the Christian, go read 1 Peter. If you're someone, even if you're not a Christian, I encourage you to do this, but if you're a Christian, you're like, I'm frustrated, or all these things we've talked about, go read 1 Peter. It's got 5 chapters. Look, you could do for a month. You could read it. You could read the whole thing in a day, but take 5 days, read one chapter for 4 weeks straight. Sit in it. Maybe read it for the whole year. Maybe read it 1 week each month for a whole year. And just sit in what he says, because he speaks more than anybody else to this idea of living as kind of minority cultural position. And I think that'd be really important to do.
Nice.
All right, to our progressive friends. Well, you need to learn that Christianity is vital and central in our story. It's the historical story for you. It's a central pillar of what they did. And I would offer that just because you know poor examples of that faith or of religious people in general, the truth of its necessity and its impact is not invalidated. And so I would offer to you, one of the best things you could do was be brave enough to go investigate that Christian faith. You want to email me, or I can send you tell you some resources to go examine, most of which were written by people who previously were atheists. Go dig deeper into the aspects of what Christianity did in creating the world. I mentioned when we were in episodes, I think 5 and 6, Tom Holland's book, Dominion. It's a big book, I warn you, and it's a history book, but he writes well. It's very engaging, but it will help you read. There's others you could read that talk about, well, what exactly does Christianity? Why do we care so much? Why do those guys care so much? And it's not about the faith side of going to heaven or something that Jesus does in my personal life. It's just that historic stuff we talked about. I would offer you need to come to grips with, and we said this early in the series, about the Enlightenment project of human improvement and progress is a myth. There's simply zero evidence for that. It's not going to happen with this supposed utopia that you wish for, because you've been fed a lie that there's just natural progress. The human history is not in some arc of improvement or betterment. I don't care who says it. There's no evidence for that. We are not better than our ancestors. We're not worse than them necessarily. But so if I know this fact, then I can understand and say, okay, look, the human species has been markedly stable over our known history of the known history. So 5,000-6,000 years. It was longer than that, as we know, but the known history. And so the only progress that we've seen has come from a non-human insertion of what the Christians would say is God into the world. Now, you don't have to agree with that, but there was a moment pre-Christianity, world stable, moment post-Christianity, significant changes, elevation of women, beginning of hospitals, the idea of separation of church and state, things we've seen. So that came from the Christian's point of view, from a non-human insertion. Again, I recognize you may go, I don't agree with that, but that's my point earlier. Be brave enough to go investigate.
Yeah.
And if you're local to me and you want to talk about it, we can have a nice long conversation over coffee. Recognize that over the, say, 250 years of the Enlightenment journey, by marginalizing religion or God or the gods, people are still unhappy. You would think if you're right, we would not have this. My first episode would be a lie because you could say, look at all the evidence of how happy we are.
Yeah.
Instead, all the evidence is on my side. And the why is, again, we've forgotten this crucial element. And not that it's only the fault of the Enlightenment, as we've already laid the blame on Christians for failing to live up for their side of it. But still, there's this point of which you could say, we've removed these things and we thought this would make life better. And instead, we had the most brutal, bloody century and really a couple of centuries in the process. And accept my viewpoint, again, or at least contend with the viewpoint that I've offered, that a concept of consent of the governed demands that civic virtue that cannot be imposed by other humans. It's got to come internally, that comes in the process. And I've kind of already laid out, if we don't, we end up in this kind of might makes right kind of story. And I don't think any of us really want to live there.
No.
And if you do want to live there, you're going to regret it when the tables turn and somebody else takes over that has a different viewpoint than yours.
Yeah.
That's our two characters. I think there's one more character that I'd like to bring to the
plot
story.
twist.
So when I first started thinking about this, it was over 2 years ago, about this specific way of thinking about all this. I've been, as you may have heard me allude to at times, and you know personally because you've been with me on the journey, in one sense been wrestling with this for at least 30 years. When I wrote something in the summer of 2022, and I wrote about the thing I just said, the progressive and the Christians, and some of the things very much in brief. But there was a third group that I noted then, and I think it's worth mentioning. And in one sense, you could see these people, I would suggest, maybe as victims of this struggle of the worldview that's happened between them. It's a person who, and I'm thinking mostly now of my students, young adults. There are some that are older, but I'm thinking of my students, say under 30s. And they become disenchanted with the country for lots of reasons. Some of them because they thought the Enlightenment was a good thing. Now they realize they've been lied to. And others because they thought there was maybe some benefit in Christian faith, but all they've seen are Christians failing to live into that and nobody really defending its usefulness. And so they're sort of just sitting there going, man, what's going on? There's some, and I think of in my classes, who I know tell me that they've been raised in a home of a religion or a Christian faith, but now they're totally rejecting it. And the cute phrase that's been used over the, say, past 5 years is they deconstructed their faith. And I want to say that I empathize with you. Because I'd say at one level, I started deconstructing my faith back in the 1980s. I was raised in a certain position. In fact, I know people in that where I was raised who I think some which think I betrayed their raising or was a bad person or failed to live into it. I mentioned earlier the religious thing my wife and I started. The Christian became a Christian church. It wasn't a church to begin with, and you and your future wife participated. Your current wife, but she was not your wife at the time. And it wasn't part of that religious group. And there were a lot of things that I was raised with about a certain viewpoint of Christianity that I reject's too strong, but I said, I'm going to review these and think my way through that. And in one sense, I would just want to offer to this group, the thing you're doing is not a horrible thing. And if you hear some religious leaders bashing you about it, I'm really sorry. They shouldn't, because in one sense, ever since Constantine, there has been a constant deconstructing and maybe reviewing of the faith from various people. So we're in good company, me and all of you guys. But if I can call out to you as a group, if you're someone who says, yeah, I used to be a Christian, but now I don't think I want to be, or I've rejected it, or if you find yourself being really disillusioned, kind of deconstructing even, is it worth being in this country? Maybe it's not worthwhile, but particularly about the religious side of it. I just want to call you to be brave enough to examine the concepts you've been taught as a child. And that's okay, but to abandon those in full without going deeply is unwise. So be brave to re-examine the faith, and in any faith, right? And I just would remind you that most of the world's inhabitants have believed in that there is a spiritual other beyond what we can see. So to run away from that and say, well, I'm just going to go, there's nothing out there, there's nothing there, that's unwise. And it's not that people were fools or misled by superstition. It's that they could see even in the natural world, which is one reason I suggest people go outside and get your hands in the dirt, that there's more going on. I think I want to close with saying this to this group. In my viewpoint, for me, the solution is not about a religion, even about Christianity, but I'm trying to tell you the true story of the world, how it was made, like why, what's the point? There was a maker. All the science points to this now. There's a longer, you go find some other smarter people than me about the science stuff, but all the science points to this. And the maker designed things. And part of the design was for you and me to have free will. And to fix things, once we used our free will to kind of break things, the maker came to earth. And again, there's a longer story there. You have to say, well, how do we know this? That's part of the examination of the historical evidence that I want to do in the future. I just want to say to you as a deconstruction person that you're maybe unhappy with the religion as you know it or the Christianity of your faith. That's okay. But be brave enough to step back into that examination. Mm-hmm. And again, if you want to talk to me, most of y'all may not even know, but I'd be here ready to have that conversation with you. That sound good, man?
That sounds great to me.
Well, my friend, we have arrived at the end. This is it. This is goodbye. This is the end of the series.
This has been fun. This has been amazing.
I feel like there's been some good lessons learned, and hopefully we've had some good communication. And I don't think I've got anything else to say other than thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for coming with me on the ride.
Love it.
Thanks for joining us on Unmoored, America Adrift in Historical Forgetfulness and Finding Our Way Back. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. If you have any questions or comments, drop an email to carl@carlkreisman.com. This episode was produced and edited by Carl Kreisman and recorded at the Winter Park Public Library. The Winter Park Library promotes the free and open exchange of ideas and does not attempt to control or take responsibility for any opinions that may be expressed in this podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute or imply an endorsement or reflection of the library's policies or beliefs. Our theme music was written and performed by Kyle Williams. A big thank you to everyone who supports the show. And if you'd like to help, visit carlkreisman.com/unmoored.